Today we welcome Ralph Ellis back to the channel. Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts, Ralph.
Good to be back on the Esoterica again. Hope everything is well.
All is well. Today we're going to be discussing the Huqoq Mosaic.
Yes. This is something that's only just come to light recently. So this is interesting because it confirms a lot of what I've been saying in previous books. So I wrote about this mosaic 4 or 5 years before it was discovered. And that's nice. It's a confirmation that what I'm saying in my books is correct. When something like this comes to light and you think, well, I know exactly what that is because I've already written about this. Gives me a distinct advantage because the archaeologists on the site had no idea what it was. So I'd written about this character back in 2014 or something like that. I forget when it was. And then they were doing this archaeology at the site of Huqoq. It's a synagogue in slightly towards the northwest of Galilee in modern Israel. And they came across this mosaic, which is it's a wonderfully animated mosaic. It's got all of these characters on it. And it shows a king, and we know he's a king because he's wearing the royal diadema, meeting with the high priest of Jerusalem. And you've got the priests on the left, and you've got an army on the right, including an army with elephants. So that's interesting. They actually brought elephants to this confrontation. And the question is, who is this guy? What does this actually portray? Now, the archaeologists on site, the chief archaeologist was Professor Jody Magnus. And she's a professor of Hebrew studies. I mean, she should know her stuff. And of course, there was a whole team there. You can imagine at this archaeological site, there was probably about 50 people working there, including scholars from all of the universities in Israel. And she said, this is an image of Alexander the Great. And you've got to wonder, what planet is she on? I mean, here we've got Alexander the Great with a beard, which he never wore, of course, and a Jewish payot, the curly side lock of hair that Orthodox Jews wear. Now, sorry, Alexander the Great is never, ever in his life going to wear a Jewish side lock of hair. It's just not possible. And yet this guy has quite obviously got a side lock of hair. It is not Alexander the Great. And besides that, the bottom panel underneath this one, which we can't see because it hasn't really been published as yet, all of this is being kept under wraps. The bottom panel shows his army being destroyed, which is obviously not something to do with Alexander the Great. He was never destroyed in Judea, Israel. He did go to meet the high priest. We have an account of that from Appian, but his army was obviously never destroyed there. So clearly this is not Alexander the Great. But it was sold as Alexander the Great. And this is what I don't like about modern archaeology, is it was sold as Alexander the Great because they got money for it. And Jody Magnus would not admit that when I confronted her about this, but they had a special deal with National Geographic. And they held these pictures back. They held them back for over a year until they were ready to publish. And then they went with this splash headline all over National Geographic saying, new mosaic of Alexander the Great discovered in Israel. it seems highly likely that National Geographic wanted a splash headline, something that would resonate with viewers. Alexander the Great discovered. Of course, it's got nothing to do with Alexander the Great at all. This is academia and archaeology being governed by the highest bidder. This is ridiculous. You shouldn't have archaeology being influenced by media outlets like National Geographic. So who is this chap? Well, I knew who it was the first time I met it, because it wasn't published until much later, as I say. And as soon as I saw it, I knew exactly who this person was. It is Bar Kamsa. And listeners are probably scratching their head and saying, who? Bar Kamsa. He is sort of famous, and having looked it up later, actually, he's not that famous. But anyway, he's there in the Talmud. So this is a character from the Talmud. And it's quite obvious that this is who he is, because look at this scene. We've got a king who is giving a calf, a sacrificial calf, to the high priest of Jerusalem. Now, when did that happen? Well, it happened, according to the Talmud, just before the Jewish Revolt. Remember, we've been talking about the Jewish Revolt quite a lot in these talks. Again, we're coming back to the same era. We're talking AD, for this particular mosaic, AD 66, something like that, the very start of the Jewish Revolt, because this is what caused the Jewish Revolt. That's why they're making this mosaic, because this was a pivotal, I'll say that again, this was a pivotal moment in Jewish history. This is the scene that caused the Jewish Revolt. So how did it do that? Well, we have the story from the Talmud. And it says, the destruction of Jerusalem, okay, we're talking about the Jewish Revolt when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. The destruction of Jerusalem came through a Kamsa and a Bar Kamsa in this way. A certain man had a friend called Kamsa and an enemy called Bar Kamsa. He once made a party and said to his servant, go and bring Kamsa. Kamsa is the elder of the two, the father. And the man went out and brought Bar Kamsa, the son, instead. When the man who gave the party found Bar Kamsa there, he said, so you see, you tell tales about me. What are you doing here? Get out. Bar Kamsa replied, since I'm here, let me stay and I'll pay for whatever I eat and drink. And if you don't recognize that particular little story, it actually comes from the Gospels. So we have a direct link there with the Gospel story. And what was this party all about? So it goes on. And it explains why this is linked to the Jewish Revolt. And okay, this is a slightly longer passage, but it's not that long. So let's go through this. Yohanan, I've got to explain the characters here. Yohanan ben Zakkai was the leader of Judaism after the Jewish Revolt. So Judaism changed after the Jewish Revolt. Before the Jewish Revolt, they had animal sacrifice, roast sacrifice, and the main temple. They didn't have synagogues. After the Jewish Revolt, all of that sacrifice business disappeared, and they had local synagogues instead of the main temple. And the person who presided over all of these changes was Yohanan ben Zakkai. And he is the guy who is writing this particular paragraph. And so this dates it to AD 70, because this guy only became high priest in AD 70 after the Jewish Revolt. So this is contemporary to these events that we're talking about. It's almost like a first-hand eyewitness account of what happened in this mosaic. So what does Johanan say? He says, Johanan went to the emperor, and the emperor at that time would have been Nero, of course. Johanan went to the emperor and said, the Jews are rebelling against you. That's the Jewish revolt, of course. Nero said, how can I tell? A bit of humor there, of course, from Nero, implying that they're always revolting. And Johanan said, send them an offering to see whether they will offer it on their altar as a roast sacrifice, which they did in those days. So Johanan ben Zakkai sent Bar Kamsa, the guy we're talking about, with fine calf as an offering. That's why you see the calf in the mosaic. He was sent with a calf as an offering to the high priest of Jerusalem. That's exactly what we see on the mosaic. While on the way, Bar Kamsa made a blemish on its upper lip. And in fact, if you look at the mosaic, if you look at the corner of its lip, you'll see a little black mark on its lip, because Bar Kamsa made a cut on its lip. Why did he do that? Well, because he made it imperfect. So now we have a really imperfect calf that's being given to the high priest. It's come from a goyim, it's come from a heathen emperor. So it's not going to be accepted in the first place. But secondly, the calf as an offering has to be perfect. And this one now had a cut on its lip because Bar Kamsa deliberately cut its lip because he wanted to stir things up. And that's exactly what happened. So anyway, Bar Kamsa makes a cut on the lip of the calf, which we can see on the mosaic. And the paragraph goes on. It says, the rabbis were inclined to offer it in order not to offend the government, the Roman government, in order not to offend Nero. But Rabbi Zechariah Abkulas said to them, people will say that blemished animals are offered on the altar. They then proposed to kill Bar Kamsa so he would not go and inform against them. But Rabbi Zechariah said to them, is one who makes a blemish on a consecrated animal to be put to death? Rabbi Johanan ben Zakkai, this is the guy who's now in charge of the new high priest after the Jewish revolt. Rabbi Johanan thereupon remarked, through the scrupulousness of Rabbi Zechariah, our house has been destroyed, our temple burnt, and we ourselves are exiled from our land. So yes, so the entire Jewish revolt only happened because Rabbi Zechariah Abkulas refused a sacrificial calf from Emperor Nero, thus angering Nero, thus causing the Jewish revolt, thus resulting in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple of Herod, the second temple. So all of that was caused by a calf offering that was refused, that was given to the high priest by this guy, Bar Kamsa. And that's why this mosaic is important. That's why it was made. It's central to the history of Judaism. And why don't the archaeologists know that on site? I mean, they're not just archaeologists, these are Hebrew historians. And they had a whole party of them. There wasn't just one person there, they had a dozen of them. And yet none of those people on the team knew the Bar Kamsa story. So I wrote to Professor Magnus, who was in charge, and said, well, don't you understand that this is Bar Kamsa? It's got nothing to do with Antiochus. It's got nothing to do with Alexander the Great. This is Bar Kamsa. And she wrote back and said, well, we can all have our own ideas, can't we? No, it's not my own ideas. This is quite obviously Bar Kamsa. He is the guy that gave the sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem, which is exactly what we see in this image. It is Bar Kamsa, and she would not accept it. That is modern academia. They are selling this image to the highest bidder for cash, and then denying reality when you tell them what this mosaic means, that this is one of the most important mosaics in terms of Judaic history that there is in the world. This is the mosaic that portrays the very event that caused the Jewish Revolt and the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of the Jews around Europe. So all of the trials and tribulations in Second World War Germany were caused by this mosaic. You see how central this mosaic is to even modern history, let alone first century history. You wouldn't have had the Jews all around Europe had it not been for this event here and the eventual exile of the Jews from Israel. So yeah, it's interesting. And the other question has to be, and this is probably even more shocking, but there we go. We like shocking, so we'll continue to shock. Who is this guy? Okay, his name's Bar Kamsa, but that's obviously a hyperchorism. It's a nickname. Who is he in reality? Well, the name Bar Kamsa means son of the locust. Okay, now that gives us a clue, because we were talking about Jesus in some of the previous videos and so on. And I was saying that Jesus was a son of Edessa, and therefore a son of King Agabus or Abgarus from Edessa. And of course, King Abgarus appears in Acts of the Apostles, where he's called Agabus. And why is he called Agabus there instead of Abgarus? Again, a bit of a play on words. They loved these plays on words. Well, the concordance to the Gospels tells us why. So if you look at the concordance, it says agabus. It means locust. Okay. And there's a good reason for calling these people locusts. It's derogatory because the Edessans came from the east, and because they destroyed Judea and the temple, courtesy of the Jewish Revolt, they considered them to be like the locusts of the plagues. And during the plagues, many centuries before, one of the plagues was a plague of locusts that came out of the east and destroyed Egypt. Well, all they're saying here is that the Edessans were a plague of locusts that came out of the east because they came from Parthia, and they destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. So they're equating the two, and that's why they are called locusts. So in Roman history, the Edessans are called locusts. They call them Arabs, which means, again, it means locust. In Gospel history, he's called Agabus, which means the locust. And here in the Talmud, he's called Bar Kamsa, which means the son of a locust. So, yeah, okay. So this is actually the Jesus character. This is King Esus Manu of Edessa, who led the Jewish revolt. Despite what some of my detractors might be saying about this, it's clear from the works of Josephus that the princes of and kings of Edessa led the Jewish revolt. And this is exactly what this character is doing. He is leading the revolt. He has an army behind him, including war elephants, and he's presenting a sacrificial calf to the high priest of Jerusalem in order to start the Jewish revolt, which is exactly what he achieved, because this calf was refused and sent back to Nero, and Nero didn't appreciate that, and it's upset Rome, and that was the beginning of the Jewish revolt. And of course, you see this character sitting here with a royal. So if we look at the actual character, he is he's wearing a royal diadema headband. So he is a king. And of course, Jesus was a king, as we know. He is wearing a Jewish sidelock of hair, a payot. And of course, Jesus was a Nazarene Jew. And of course, he would have worn a curly sidelock of hair. He is wearing a mustache and beard, which all of the Edessans did because they were Nazarene. And the Nazarene were not allowed to shave, and therefore they always had a mustache and beard. His hair is ginger, and I've long said that Jesus had ginger hair. That's another topic. It comes from, well, from several sources, really. It comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which said the new Messiah would be ginger. And it comes from Egyptian history. I don't know if a lot of people will know that Ramesses II was ginger as well. His mummy was taken to Paris in 1976, and the forensic labs there in Paris determined that Ramesses II was ginger. And if you look at the portraits of Cleopatra, the famous Queen Cleopatra, she's portrayed as being ginger as well. So we have this strand of gingerism that sort of goes through this royal line. And he's wearing a purple cloak. So of course, when Jesus was actually crucified, he was wearing a purple cloak. Why? Because he was a pretender to the throne of Rome as well. That's what the whole Jewish revolt was all about. The Jewish revolt was about taking over not just Judea, it was about taking over the Roman Empire. And only the emperor was allowed to wear a purple cloak. And that's why this character is wearing a purple cloak. It's the imperial cloak of Rome. And so he's a pretender to the throne of Rome. And if you'll notice as well, he's wearing stockings. His legs are quite different to the priestly legs. Why is that important? It's because the Greeks and the Romans did not wear stockings. So Alexander the Great would never have been wearing stockings. But the Parthians did. The Parthians, the Persians, they always wore stockings. And here this guy is portraying himself quite obviously as a Parthian, as a Persian. That's why he's wearing stockings. So this image perfectly mimics this meeting between Bar Kamsa and the high priest of Jerusalem. That's what this was about. And yeah, in conclusion, you've got to, oh, and of course, the bottom register, we mustn't forget the bottom register, shows that the army, this army of this king was destroyed. So on the bottom register, which we don't have here, the elephants are all upside down because they've all been killed. And that's exactly what happened. Obviously, the army of Alexander the Great was never destroyed, but the army of King Esus Manu of Edessa was destroyed after the Jewish revolt. And that's why we see the army all dead in the bottom register of this particular mosaic. So it's telling a whole story of the Jewish revolt. And that's why this is such an important mosaic.
Thank you, Ralph.